Alright guys, we are back with another video. Today we're actually going to be diving into the 4AGE that we all know and love, whether it's from the Ae92, the Ae86, or even the Mr2. Let's dive into everything you really need to know when it comes to these lovely 4-cylinder engines. Let's get into it. So the 4AGE, well, the 4AGE is a 4-cylinder 1.6 liter engine. Now there's different variations, but let's start from the very first well-known 4AGE. This is a 16-valve 4AGE, and not only is a 16-valve 4AGE, this is a big port 4AGE. Now, how you can tell it's a big port 4AGE is about these valve cover, these little spark plug valleys right here. They'll have this design if it's a big port. However, if it's a small port, it'll have a rib design. And you could also tell by the intake manifold. On the intake manifold, it'll say TVIS. And on the small port 4AGEs, they'll have a rib design. Now, again, speaking of the 16-valve 4AGEs, there's either big port and small port when it comes to them. And now they have different variations on what's differences between them, but the most obvious thing is big port and small port. The ports are bigger on the big port and smaller on the small port. Now, why it's smaller on the small port 4AGE is because they deleted TVIS. And now what TVIS is, it's pretty much like Honda VTEC. However, it changes the pathways in the intake runners versus the cams when it comes to VTEC. However, like I said, small ports don't have TVIS and big ports do have TVIS. And they made different power outputs dependent on those factors. Now, when it comes to the big port 4AGE, they made around like 110-ish horsepower versus a small port 4AGE made around 125 to 130 horsepower. So, that's a drastic difference, obviously. Different people like different 4AGEs, whether it's a big port or small port. They both have their, good and bad depending on what power output you do and the availability. When it comes to these big port 4AGEs, they're way more available because you can find them in the Ae86 and Mr2. They're just more common to find these big port 4AGEs versus a small port 4AGE. They're just not as common when it comes to small port 4AGE, and like I said, they are very more common to find, even though these 4AGEs are becoming a lot more harder to find nowadays. Now, diving more into these 4AGEs, the earlier big port 4AGE had a lower compression ratio versus the small port having a higher compression ratio. So that's one of the cool things. When it comes to big port, a lot of people tend to turbocharge the big port versus a small port. However, small port had a lot of other, upsides to it being a small port. However, both 4AGEs came with this really cool oil cooler lines, connecting right under the housing, so it connects to the oil coolers. So that's pretty cool. Pretty much all 4AGEs had oil coolers. However, the small port 4AGEs had oil squirters in the engine block versus, the big port not having it. Now, the big port also was in earlier versions, it was weaker at a free rib design versus the newer big port 4AGEs, which had more reinforced ribs. And then the small port 4AGEs, straight out the gate, had more rib designs than the big port in general in the earlier versions of it. However, when it comes to the big port 4AGE, not a lot of people know a lot when it comes to the modifications. Now let's talk about the modifications and how you are going to make realistic power on these 4AGEs. Now, the best way to make realistic power is going forced induction. Now, whether that's going with a supercharger or turbocharger, most people opt for a turbocharger. And why we do that, it's the most easiest bang for your buck modifications when it comes to making power outlays. You could realistically make 2, 3, and even 400 and up horsepower when it comes to turbocharging these 4AGE engines, and that's what I definitely recommend you guys doing. However, you don't want to do on stock internals. You want to build the bottom end, make it pretty reliable to handle that much boost and make fun, reliable power. Now, a lot of people tend to have these big port 4AGEs, and they're expecting a lot of NA modifications and trying to make it fast on that. However, it's not the best way to go about doing it. However, if you do want to go the NA route, there's some things that you can do, like the common things of being exhaust headers. You could do, you could port the exhaust and intake ports. You could pour and polish the cylinder head, renew it like that. Put different springs, put different camshafts, because they actually make performance camshafts for these. You're gonna pay an arm and a leg. However, they do make performance camshafts, so you could upgrade the camshaft, upgrade the cam gears, switch out the timing, it'll be pretty fun. But you know, there's not a lot of huge gains that you can make when it's coming to NA form. There are some, however, you're just going to spend a lot of money when it comes to going the NA route on making huge power. So like I said, go with the forced induction route. Turbo these love being turboed. And also, when it comes to modifying the 4AGE, the one site that you really by far need to check out is Mannon Racing Products, MRP. They're a great website when it comes to the 4AGE. There's so much available performance parts for these, whether it's cams, whether it's turbo kits, whether it's, you know, cam gears, whether it's like the aftermarket intake manifold. There's just so many things that you can get for the 4AGE, whether it's a 16 valve or 20 valve. There's just a lot of performance modifications that you can do when it comes to it. It's a little bit pricey, but trust me, it's very quality parts that it's really worth your time. So I definitely suggest check out Mannon Racing Products. I'm not sponsored by them, I'd love to be. However, that's definitely a site you should check. There's some other websites that you should check when it comes to these. I believe it's Master Speed Racing is one of them, but I'll link all of them below so you can go ahead and check them out on your free time. However, like I said, when it comes to these 4AGEs, they're very fun, peppy cars. You know, if you're coming from the Ae92 platform, they're like freaking, they're badass compared to like a 4AF or 4AFE. And if you're coming from a 4AG, you know, Ae86, they're way even better than the 4ACs, you know. So regardless, they're very fun engines. Straight out the gate, they don't make that much power, but man, they got heart to them. They can rev up and just take a beating. They're very fun, beautiful engines that really have a heart and soul to them. So I definitely recommend you guys getting into the 4AGE. If you have any questions about the 4AGE or any questions about your Ae92, feel free to send me a question down below in the comments, or even message me on Instagram at Tune for Speed without the 2 E's. I will catch you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Peace.